I think that our role as artists and as musicians is also to facilitate that discovery. Like when my band, when we discovered funk music, it was in the 90s. We discovered funk through Snoop and Dre because our parents didn't listen to that, being, two Jewish kids from Montreal. Our parents didn't listen to Parliament. But through Snoop and Dre and Warren G, we discovered funk music. We became obsessed with it. And then with my band, we started making funk music within the context of electronic music because we wanted to educate electronic music listeners and make them discover all this funk music, Zap, Cameo, Rick James, and all that, and almost um, give it a new context and a new value for listeners who knew it but passively, not actively. You know what I mean? And I think musicians have a duty to be sometimes to be a vector and to facilitate that dialogue between different eras and to facilitate discoveries. We got two DJs here, Toki and A-trak. You guys have that power of curation. You can put people on that journey and make them discover and build those links that you talked about.
No doubt, no doubt.
Yeah, so even to, Toki, when you ask whether we think that it's important for the younger listeners to go and do their homework,
Yeah.
I can speak for ourselves as fans, as Dave mentioned, as Jewish kids from Canada. uh, our whole discovery of the lineage of music came through being fans of hip hop, discovering hip hop, in the early '90s, going from the Beastie Boys in Cypress Hill to Native Tongues, Tribe, De La,
Mhm.
Pete Rock, DJ Premier, and
Mob
then
Deep, Nas, Wu.
all of that, and then then being curious about the samples, and
Yeah.
through trying to find out what those samples were, then learning about soul, funk, jazz. So of course we encourage it because we know how much that enriched us, and we're sitting here in a panel about the Black experience in America, and we're a couple of white Canadians. I hope we're not out of place, but I can say firsthand that our own education and our understanding of the Black experience, which is still an ongoing learning process, was through hip hop. And even myself, as I started getting known as a DJ and I started meeting American DJs and going to the neighborhoods where they were from and hearing firsthand the stories of how they got started, who had the turntables down the block, or whose father was a DJ, who got records from whom. Those stories helped me understand the lineage and the sort of even the socio-economic context for all this music that we were falling in love with.
I think the thing that sticks out here is when you talk about hip hop, unlike music that came before, hip hop is music that is made up of pre-existing music, like
Mhm.
the whole concept of sampling. But I've always thought of sampling as like going to the library, like because if you hear a sample and you're like, wow, that whose beat is that? Where did that come from?
Right.
It encourages you to go find out like where that came from, who made it, what's the song, etc. Hip hop is like a history lesson, even in the music, like just the way the tracks are composed.
Yep.
And I mean, I remember as a kid, like all of that, 70s funk and R&B. I still think the 70s is maybe the greatest historical era in music ever. I remember that time growing up as a kid, and then later as an adult, when people started sampling all that 70s music. And so for me, it was like, I got a chance to live through this a few
Quite.
times. And then how somebody cut it up, like a producer in hip hop, your skill is how you find a way to take that sample and make something new out of it, as opposed to, a producer who just basically takes an old song, takes the lyrics off and like has somebody rap over it. Well, now the song is doing all the work. You haven't really done anything. But if you can take that old track and flip it in such a way that the old now sounds new, that's art. That's a skill. So I remember early on listening to a lot of early hip hop coming out of New York. I'm not from New York. I'm from Detroit. I rep the D. Respect to New York, but like, it's not only New York, right? And I would listen to a lot of that music at the time, back in the early to mid 80s. And I'm like, this is cool, but we need another sound. Like there needs to be more sounds. And eventually, you know, Dre came out on the West Coast. The whole West Coast thing, as you mentioned, with like Parliament and all that. A lot of that East Coast music was inspired by James Brown. The music coming from the West, inspired by George Clinton and Parliament. And it's like now we're starting to get like diversified sounds. And, you know, then people went further and further and further. So hip hop as a music has always, to me, been really educational in its nature. If you, as the listener, again, step up and like, wow, that's a nice beat. Where did that come from? Who made that? So that you're not like just sitting up thinking what you heard is brand new when there's a whole long history to it.